Rich people humiliated a teacher at a wedding, but when she said 3 words, everyone was shocked. The sun rose over the pristine skyline of Crystal Brook, California, casting a golden glow on the immaculate lawns and gleaming mansions that dotted the hillsides. It was the day of the most anticipated event of the year, the wedding of Asher Blackwood and Olivia Sinclair, heirs to 2 of the most powerful families in the state. At the luxurious Crystal Brook Grand Hotel, a flurry of activity buzzed through the air as final preparations were made for the ceremony. Amidst the chaos of florists, caterers, and decorators, a young woman named Zoe Harper moved with quiet efficiency, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail as she checked items off her clipboard. "Excuse me, miss?" a gruff voice called out. Zoe turned to see a portly man in a chef's uniform, his face red with exertion. "Where do you want the ice sculpture?" Zoe smiled warmly. "The garden terrace, please. And make sure it's in the shade. We don't want it melting before the ceremony." As the chef nodded and wheeled the massive block of ice away, Zoe couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. She may have been just a local elementary school teacher, but her organizational skills had caught the attention of the wedding planner, who had hired her as an assistant for this grand affair. "Zoe!" a shrill voice cut through the air. Zoe turned to see Vivian Blackwood, the groom's mother, striding towards her in a designer suit that probably cost more than Zoe's yearly salary. "Where are the imported peonies I specifically requested?" "Mrs. Blackwood, I believe they're being arranged as we speak," Zoe replied calmly. "I can check on them if you'd like." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "See that you do. This wedding must be absolutely perfect. The Blackwoods and Sinclairs are uniting 2 of the most influential families in the country. We can't have any common touches." As Vivian swept away, Zoe took a deep breath. She'd grown used to the condescending attitudes of Crystal Brook's elite over the past few weeks, but it still stung. Still, she reminded herself, this job would pay for much-needed supplies for her classroom. It was worth it for her students. As the morning progressed, guests began to arrive. Limousines and luxury cars lined the driveway, disgorging a parade of the rich and famous. Zoe marveled at the glittering jewelry and designer outfits, feeling decidedly out of place in her simple black dress. "Quite a spectacle, isn't it?" a warm voice said beside her. Zoe turned to see an older man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, but lacked the haughty air of most guests. "It certainly is," Zoe agreed. "I've never seen anything like it." The man chuckled. "Neither have I, and I've been to my fair share of fancy parties. I'm Daniel, by the way." "Zoe," she replied, shaking his hand. "Are you a friend of the family?" A shadow passed over Daniel's face. "How you could say that? I'm here to observe." Before Zoe could inquire further, a commotion near the hotel entrance caught her attention. The bride had arrived. Olivia Sinclair was a vision in white, her gown a masterpiece of lace and silk. But as she stepped out of the limousine, Zoe noticed something odd. The bride's face was pale, her eyes wide with what looked like fear. As Olivia was whisked away by her attendants, Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, but she had no time to dwell on it. The ceremony was about to begin. The garden terrace had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Thousands of white roses and peonies adorned every surface, their fragrance filling the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from a canopy of white silk, casting a soft glow over the assembled guests. Zoe stood at the back, making sure everything was in place as the string quartet began to play. The groom, Asher Blackwood, took his place at the altar, looking every inch the dashing heir in his tailored tuxedo. The processional began, and all eyes turned to the aisle as Olivia appeared. She was breathtaking, but Zoe couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her bouquet. As Olivia reached the altar, the officiant began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." But before he could finish the sentence, Olivia suddenly turned to face the crowd. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "I can't do this!" A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Asher's face drained of color. "Olivia, what are you saying?" Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. "I'm sorry, Asher. I thought I could go through with this, but I can't. This isn't what I want. I don't love you." The terrace erupted into chaos. Vivian Blackwood let out a shriek of outrage. "You little harlot, how dare you humiliate my son like this?" As accusations and shouts filled the air, Zoe found herself moving forward. She didn't know what possessed her, but she couldn't stand by and watch this unfold. "Please, everyone," she called out, her voice somehow carrying over the din. "Let's all take a moment to calm down." Vivian whirled on her, eyes blazing. "And who do you think you are? Some little nobody hired to serve drinks. How dare you presume to speak here?" Zoe felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she stood her ground. "I may not be wealthy or influential, but I am a human being, just like everyone here. And right now we need to show some compassion and understanding." A hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, it seemed like Zoe's words had made an impact. But then Vivian's face twisted into a sneer. "Compassion? Understanding? You know nothing of our world, you pathetic little teacher. Go back to your tiny apartment and leave matters of importance to your betters." As laughter rippled through the crowd, Zoe felt something snap inside her. Years of staying quiet, of accepting the disdain of people like Vivian Blackwood, suddenly came rushing to the surface. "You want to know who I am?" Zoe's voice was quiet, but filled with steel. "My name is Zoe Harper, and I am the daughter of Daniel Harper." A shocked silence fell over the terrace. All eyes turned to the man Zoe had spoken with earlier, who now stood with a proud smile on his face. "That's right," Daniel said, moving to stand beside his daughter. "Zoe is my daughter. And while I may not flaunt my wealth like some, I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood, that my little nobody of a daughter could buy and sell your entire family 10 times over." Vivian's face had gone deathly pale. Everyone in Crystalbrook knew the name Daniel Harper, the reclusive billionaire whose technology empire dwarfed most others in Silicon Valley. Mr. Harper, Asher's father, Theodore Blackwood, stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. "I assure you we had no idea. Please accept our deepest apologies for this misunderstanding." Daniel's eyes were cold. "Oh, I think we understand perfectly well, Mr. Blackwood. And as of this moment, all business dealings between Harper Innovations and Blackwood Industries are terminated." The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the crowd. The Blackwoods company relied heavily on contracts with Harper Innovations. Without them, as the reality of the situation sank in, Zoe turned to Olivia, who stood frozen at the altar. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't have the courage to do this on my own." As the chaos of the ruined wedding swirled around them, Zoe couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. Something had been set in motion today, something that would change Crystalbrook forever. The days following the ill-fated wedding were a whirlwind of gossip, speculation, and seismic shifts in Crystalbrook's social landscape. The story of the jilted groom, the runaway bride, and the secret billionaire's daughter spread like wildfire through the community. Zoe found herself at the center of a storm she never could have anticipated. Overnight, she went from being an anonymous school teacher to one of the most talked-about people in town. Paparazzi camped outside her modest apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had turned Crystalbrook's social hierarchy on its head. But while the town buzzed with excitement, the principal players in the drama were grappling with the fallout in their own ways. Olivia Sinclair had retreated to her family's mountain cabin seeking solitude and clarity. As she sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant peaks, she felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The weight of expectation that had burdened her for so long was gone, but in its place was a void she didn't know how to fill. A gentle knock on the door roused her from her thoughts. To her surprise, it was Zoe. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," Zoe said hesitantly. "I just wanted to check on you." Olivia managed a small smile. "Not at all, please come in." As they sat in the cozy living room, Olivia found herself opening up to Zoe in a way she never had with anyone before. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone expected me to be," she confessed. "The perfect daughter, the perfect socialite, the perfect bride-to-be. But standing there at the altar, I realized I had no idea who I really was." Zoe listened with empathy. "It takes a lot of courage to walk away from something like that, but now you have the chance to figure out who you really are and what you want." Olivia's eyes lit up with a spark of determination. "You're right, and I think I want to do something meaningful, something that actually helps people." As they talked late into the night, the seeds of an idea began to take root in Olivia's mind. She had resources, connections, and a newfound desire to make a difference. Perhaps this crisis could be the catalyst for real change, not just in her life but in Crystalbrook itself. Meanwhile, across town, Asher Blackwood was facing a crisis of his own. The collapse of his family's business deal with Harper Innovations had sent Blackwood Industries into a tailspin. As he sat in his father's study, listening to heated phone calls and watching the stock prices plummet, Asher felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in his life, the carefully constructed facade of the Blackwood family was crumbling. And in its ruins, Asher saw an opportunity to rebuild something authentic. "Father," he said, interrupting Theodore's frantic call with the company lawyers, "I think it's time we had a serious talk about the future of Blackwood Industries." Theodore looked at his son with a mix of exhaustion and skepticism. "What are you talking about, Asher? We're in crisis mode here." Asher took a deep breath. "Exactly. And maybe this crisis is exactly what we needed. We've been so focused on profit and power that we've lost sight of what really matters. What if we used this as an opportunity to reorient our business towards more ethical practices?" Theodore scoffed. "Ethical practices don't pay the bills, son." "Maybe not in the short term," Asher countered, "but think about the long-term benefits: improved public image, employee loyalty, sustainable growth. We could be pioneers in corporate responsibility." As he spoke, Asher felt a passion he'd never experienced before. For years he'd gone through the motions of being the dutiful heir, but now he saw a chance to create real, meaningful change. Theodore studied his son for a long moment. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Asher nodded. "I am. And I'm willing to put everything I have into making it work." After a tense silence, Theodore sighed. "All right, Asher. You've got 1 month to put together a proposal. Show me how we can turn this ship around." As Asher left the study, his mind racing with ideas, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in his life, he was excited about the future. Across town, in a sleek office overlooking the city, Daniel Harper was having a very different conversation with his daughter. "I'm proud of you, Zoe," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You showed real courage standing up to those snobs." Zoe smiled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. But I can't help feeling like I've opened Pandora's box. Everything's changing so fast." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Change can be scary, but it can also be an opportunity. You've shaken things up in Crystalbrook. Now the question is, what are you going to do with that power?" Zoe considered her father's words. She thought about her students, about the inequality she saw every day in Crystalbrook. "I want to make a difference," she said slowly. "Not just in my classroom, but in the whole community. But I don't know where to start." Daniel smiled. "So that's my girl. How about we start by setting up a foundation? We can focus on education, community development, whatever you think will have the biggest impact." As they began to brainstorm ideas, Zoe felt a surge of excitement. She had always wanted to make a difference, but now she had the resources and the platform to do so on a much larger scale. But not everyone in Crystalbrook was embracing the winds of change. In her opulent mansion, Vivian Blackwood was plotting her revenge. The humiliation she had suffered at the wedding still burned, and she was determined to make Zoe Harper pay. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into her phone. "I want dirt on that little upstart. There must be something in her past we can use." As she hung up, Vivian's eyes gleamed with malice. She had built her social empire through manipulation and cunning, and she wasn't about to let it crumble because of some school teacher with a rich daddy. What Vivian didn't realize was that her machinations were about to set in motion a chain of events that would change Crystalbrook and all of their lives forever. As the sun set on Crystalbrook, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and gleaming high-rises, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The old order had been disrupted, and in its place, new alliances were forming, new ideas were taking root, and new challenges were emerging. For Zoe, Olivia, Asher, and all the others caught up in this whirlwind of change, the coming days would test their resolve, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately reveal the true nature of their characters. The transformation of Crystalbrook had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of the fateful wedding day continued to spread through Crystalbrook. The once immutable social hierarchy was in flux, and with it came new opportunities, unexpected alliances, and deeply entrenched resistance. Zoe Harper found herself at the center of this maelstrom of change. With the support of her father, she had established the Harper Foundation, dedicated to education reform and community development in Crystalbrook. The foundation's first major project was the renovation and expansion of the city's underfunded public schools. On a bright autumn morning, Zoe stood before a crowd gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of the new Crystalbrook Community Learning Center. As she looked out at the sea of faces, a mix of her students, their parents, local officials, and even some of the town's elite, she felt a surge of pride and determination. "Education is the great equalizer," Zoe began, her voice clear and confident. "It has the power to bridge divides, open doors, and transform lives. This learning center will be more than just a building. It will be a beacon of hope and opportunity for every child in Crystalbrook." As applause rippled through the crowd, Zoe caught sight of a familiar face. Olivia Sinclair stood at the back of the crowd, a warm smile on her face as she listened to Zoe's speech. In the months since the wedding, Olivia had undergone a profound transformation of her own. Gone were the designer dresses and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, her face free of makeup and glowing with a newfound sense of purpose. After the ceremony, Olivia made her way through the dispersing crowd to congratulate Zoe. "That was inspiring," Olivia said, embracing Zoe. "You're really making a difference here." Zoe beamed. "Thanks, Olivia, but I hear you've been pretty busy yourself. How's the non-profit coming along?" Olivia's eyes lit up. "It's challenging, but incredibly rewarding. We're focusing on providing job training and placement services for underprivileged youth in Crystalbrook. It's amazing to see these kids discover their potential when given the chance." As they chatted, neither woman noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing the occupant within. Vivian Blackwood watched the scene unfold with narrowed eyes, her perfectly manicured nails drumming impatiently on the leather armrest. "Keep digging," she snapped into her phone. "There must be something we can use against her. Nobody's past is spotless." But even as Vivian plotted, the seeds of change continued to take root in Crystalbrook. Across town, in the newly renovated offices of Blackwood Industries, Asher Blackwood was in the midst of a heated board meeting. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns," Asher said, his voice firm as he addressed the skeptical faces around the table. "But our shift towards sustainable practices and ethical business models isn't just about doing good. It's about securing our future in a changing world." He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showcasing projections of long-term growth and improved public perception. "By investing in renewable energy, fair labor practices, and community development, we're not only reducing our environmental impact, but also building a more resilient and respected company." Theodore Blackwood, who had been listening silently, finally spoke up. "Asher's right," he said, surprising everyone in the room. "I was skeptical at first, but the numbers don't lie. Our new initiatives are already showing positive results. It's time we embrace this new direction fully." As the board members reluctantly nodded their assent, Asher felt a wave of relief and excitement. It had been an uphill battle, but he was finally starting to see real change within the company his family had built. Meanwhile, in a cozy cafe downtown, Daniel Harper was having an unexpected meeting of his own. Across the table sat Regina Sinclair, Olivia's mother and one of Crystalbrook's most influential socialites. "I must admit, Daniel," Regina said, stirring her latte, "I was surprised when you reached out. Our families haven't exactly been on the best terms lately." Daniel chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. But I think it's time we put aside our differences and focus on what's really important, the future of Crystalbrook." Regina raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did you have in mind?" "A partnership," Daniel replied, leaning forward. "Your social connections combined with my resources. We could create a coalition of Crystalbrook's most influential families and businesses, all working together to address the city's most pressing issues." Regina considered his words carefully. She had to admit the idea was intriguing. and after seeing the positive changes her daughter had made in her life, Regina had begun to question some of her own long-held beliefs about status and success. "It won't be easy," she said finally. "There are a lot of people in our circle who are resistant to change." Daniel nodded. "I know. But if we can show them the benefits, not just for the community, but for their own businesses and reputations, I think we can win them over." As they continued to discuss the possibilities, neither of them realized that their conversation would set in motion a series of events that would reshape Crystalbrook's power dynamics in ways they could never have imagined. Back at the Learning Center construction site, Zoe and Olivia were wrapping up their conversation when they were approached by an unexpected visitor. Asher Blackwood, looking somewhat out of place in his business suit amidst the dusty construction equipment, made his way towards them. "Zoe, Olivia," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Both women tensed slightly, unsure of his intentions, but Asher's next words took them by surprise. "I wanted to congratulate you both on the amazing work you're doing," he said sincerely. "And I was hoping we might be able to discuss some potential collaborations between Blackwood Industries and your organizations." Zoe and Olivia exchanged shocked glances. This was certainly not what they had expected from Asher Blackwood. "I know we have a complicated history," Asher continued, "but I'm trying to change things at Blackwood Industries. We want to be part of the positive changes happening in Crystalbrook. If you're willing, I'd love to explore how we might work together." As the three of them began to tentatively discuss possibilities, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of a nearby building. Jackson Lee, a young journalist for the Crystalbrook Chronicle, scribbled furiously in his notebook. This unexpected alliance between the Harper, Sinclair and Blackwood heirs was big news, news that could shake the foundations of Crystalbrook's established order. What Jackson didn't realize was that his article would not only make his career, but also set off a chain reaction that would bring long-buried secrets to light and force every resident of Crystalbrook to confront their own values and beliefs. As the sun began to set over the construction site, casting a warm glow over the scene, there was a palpable sense of hope and possibility in the air. Change was coming to Crystalbrook, whether the old guard was ready for it or not. But even as new alliances formed and positive initiatives took root, darker forces were gathering strength. Vivian Blackwood's quest for revenge was far from over, and she wasn't the only one resistant to the winds of change sweeping through the city. The stage was set for a clash between the old world and the new, a battle that would test the resolve of Zoe, Olivia, Asher, and everyone else caught in its wake. The transformation of Crystalbrook had begun in earnest, but the road ahead was far from smooth. As night fell over the city, the players in this unfolding drama returned to their respective homes, unaware that their actions and decisions in the coming days would not only shape their own destinies, but the future of Crystalbrook itself. The Crystalbrook Chronicle's front-page headline sent shockwaves through the community. "Unlikely alliance, Harper, Sinclair, and Blackwood heirs join forces for city's future." Jackson Lee's article detailed the surprise meeting at the Learning Center construction site and hinted at the potential for a major shift in the city's power dynamics. The reaction was swift and polarized. Many in Crystalbrook, especially younger residents and those who had long felt marginalized by the city's elite, celebrated the news as a sign of positive change. Others, particularly those with vested interests in maintaining the status quo, viewed the alliance with suspicion and fear. No one was more enraged by the article than Vivian Blackwood. As she stormed into her son's office at Blackwood Industries, her face was a mask of fury. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed, slamming the newspaper down on Asher's desk. "Collaborating with those upstarts? Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation?" Asher met his mother's gaze calmly. "Our reputation was already changing, Mother. I'm simply ensuring that it changes for the better. Blackwood Industries needs to adapt if we want to survive in the modern world." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "This is about that teacher, isn't it? Zoe Harper. I warned you she would be trouble. Well, don't worry, I'll take care of her soon enough." As she turned to leave, Asher called out, "Mother, wait. Whatever you're planning, don't do it. Times are changing. If you go after Zoe, you'll only be hurting yourself and this family." Vivian paused at the door, her hand on the knob. For a moment, it seemed like Asha's words might have gotten through to her, but then her shoulders stiffened, and without another word, she swept out of the office. Asha sank back in his chair, a feeling of dread settling in his stomach. He knew his mother well enough to recognize the dangerous glint in her eye. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't going to be good for anyone involved. Across town, in the modest offices of the Harper Foundation, Zoe was dealing with her own fallout from the article. Her phone had been ringing non-stop all morning, with reporters seeking comments and old acquaintances suddenly eager to reconnect. "I don't understand," Zoe said, rubbing her temples as she talked to her father on the phone. "We haven't even done anything yet. Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this?" Daniel's voice was calm and reassuring. "Because people can sense when change is coming, sweetheart, and change makes people either very excited or very nervous. Right now, you're at the center of that change." As she hung up, Zoe's assistant poked her head in the door. "Ms. Harper, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." To Zoe's surprise, the visitor turned out to be Jackson Lee, the journalist who had written the article. The young man looked nervous as he entered her office, clutching a manila envelope. "Ms. Harper, I'm sorry to bother you," he began, "but there's something you need to know. After my article was published, I received an anonymous tip. Someone is digging into your past, and they're not just looking for harmless gossip. They're trying to find something they can use against you." Zoe felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you know who's behind it?" Jackson shook his head. "No, but given the resources they're using, it has to be someone with a lot of power and influence. Ms. Harper, is there anything in your past that could be used against you? Anything at all?" Zoe's mind raced. She had always lived a relatively quiet life focused on her teaching and her students. But there was one incident from her college days, a protest that had gotten out of hand, resulting in her arrest. The charges had been dropped and the records sealed, but if someone was determined enough— "Thank you for telling me this, Mr. Lee," Zoe said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "I appreciate your integrity." After Jackson left, Zoe sat at her desk, staring out the window at the Crystalbrook skyline. She had known that trying to change things wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected it to get this personal this quickly. Meanwhile, in a sun-drenched studio across town, Olivia Sinclair was facing challenges of her own, as she guided a group of teenagers through a series of team-building exercises. Her mind kept wandering to the headlines and the potential backlash. "All right, everyone. Great job," she said, clapping her hands to get the group's attention. "Let's take a quick break and then we'll move on to the next activity." As the teens dispersed, chattering excitedly, Olivia felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Maria, one of the program's most promising participants. "Mrs. Sinclair," Maria said hesitantly, "is it true what they're saying? That you're working with Zoe Harper and Asha Blackwood?" Olivia nodded, curious about the girl's reaction. "It is. We're exploring ways we can work together to make Crystalbrook a better place for everyone. What do you think about that?" Maria's eyes lit up. "I think it's amazing. My mom always said that the rich people in this town didn't care about folks like us. But if you're all working together, maybe things really can change." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. This, she realized, was why she had walked away from her old life. This hope, this possibility of real change, it was worth more than all the luxury and status she had left behind. As the day wore on, the various players in Crystalbrook's unfolding drama continued to navigate the choppy waters of change. Asha threw himself into his work at Blackwood Industries, determined to prove that ethical business practices could be profitable. Daniel Harper and Regina Sinclair continued to reach out to their peers, slowly building a coalition of influential figures committed to positive change. But even as hope and optimism grew in some quarters, shadows were deepening in others. In her mansion on the hill, Vivian Blackwood was meeting with a group of Crystalbrook's old guard, wealthy families and business owners who saw the changes in the city as a threat to their way of life. "We cannot allow this revolution to continue," Vivian declared, her voice dripping with disdain. "If we don't act now, everything we've built, everything we stand for, will be destroyed." As heads nodded in agreement, plans were made and resources allocated. The battle for Crystalbrook's future was about to enter a new, more dangerous phase. As night fell over the city, Zoe stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the twinkling lights below. She thought about the forces aligning against her, about the risks she was taking. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really prepared for this fight? But then she thought about her students, about Maria, and all the others who saw hope in what she and her unlikely allies were trying to do. She thought about the vision of a more equitable, vibrant Crystalbrook that had driven her from the beginning. Taking a deep breath, Zoe straightened her shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets from her past might be dragged into the light, she was committed to seeing this through. The transformation of Crystalbrook had become more than just a personal mission. It was a movement, a chance to create real, lasting change. As she turned to go back inside, Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. My place, 8 a.m. Bring Asher." Zoe's heart raced as she read the message. Something had happened. Something big. As she replied with a quick confirmation, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a turning point. The next few days would determine not just their fate, but the fate of Crystalbrook itself. Little did Zoe know that across town, in a dimly lit room, someone was poring over old documents and grainy photographs, piecing together the secrets of her past. The storm that had been brewing was about to break, and no one in Crystalbrook would be left untouched by its fury. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Zoe arrived at Olivia's loft. She found Asher already there, pacing nervously as Olivia prepared coffee in the kitchen. "What's going on?" Zoe asked, sensing the tension in the room. "Your message sounded urgent." Olivia took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "I received an anonymous email last night. It contained information about all of us." Asher's face paled. "What kind of information?" "The kind that could destroy everything we've been working for," Olivia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zoe, they know about the protest in college. Asher, they have details about some of Blackwood Industries' less ethical practices from before you took over. And me, they found out about my struggle with addiction during my rebellious phase." The room fell silent as the weight of Olivia's words sank in. Zoe felt her heart racing, memories of that chaotic night in college flooding back. She had never told anyone about her arrest, not even her father. Asher broke the silence, his voice tight with anger. "It has to be my mother. She's been threatening to take care of the situation for weeks now." "But how did she get all this information?" Zoe asked, her mind reeling. "And more importantly, what are we going to do about it?" Before anyone could answer, there was a knock at the door. Olivia opened it to reveal Jackson Lee, the young journalist who had warned Zoe earlier. "I'm sorry to intrude," Jackson said, looking nervous but determined. "But I couldn't sit on this any longer. I know who's behind the smear campaign against you all." As Jackson explained what he had uncovered, the pieces started to fall into place. It wasn't just Vivian Blackwood behind the attacks. It was a coalition of Crystalbrook's old guard, wealthy families and business owners who saw the changes in the city as a threat to their power and privilege. "They're planning to release all this information to the media tomorrow," Jackson finished. "They think it will discredit you and put an end to your efforts to change things in Crystalbrook." The room fell silent again as the four of them absorbed the gravity of the situation. The future they had been working towards, the hope they had inspired in so many, was on the verge of crumbling. Zoe was the first to speak, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't let them win. Not like this." Asher nodded, a look of determination replacing the shock on his face. "Zoe's right. If we back down now, nothing will ever change in Crystalbrook." "But what can we do?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Once this information is out there, our credibility will be shot. Everything we've built will be tainted." It was Jackson who offered a suggestion, his eyes bright with the excitement of a true journalist onto a big story. What if we beat them to the punch? What if we tell our own stories, on our own terms, before they can twist the narrative?" The idea hung in the air, both terrifying and exhilarating in its boldness. Zoe, Asher, and Olivia exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "It's risky," Asher said slowly, "but it might be our only chance." Zoe nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. We could hold a town hall meeting. Invite everyone in Crystalbrook, not just the elite, but people from all walks of life. We'll tell our stories, admit our mistakes, and share our vision for the future. And I can help, Jackson added. I'll write an in-depth piece giving context to your past actions and highlighting the positive changes you're trying to make. We can release it right after the town hall. As they began to plan, a new energy filled the room. What had started as a crisis was transforming into an opportunity, a chance to not just defend themselves, but to deepen their commitment to transparency and change. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Calls were made, venues secured, and social media buzzed with announcements of an emergency town hall meeting. Curiosity and speculation ran rampant through Crystalbrook, as people wondered what could be so important. As the designated time approached, the Crystalbrook Community Center was packed to capacity. The air thrummed with tension and anticipation. In a small room off the main hall, Zoe, Olivia, and Asher gathered for a final moment of preparation. "Are we really ready for this?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zoe reached out and squeezed her hand. "We have to be. It's time to show Crystalbrook who we really are, flaws and all." Asher nodded, straightening his tie. "Whatever happens out there, we're in this together." As they stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. Faces both familiar and unknown looked up at them, expectant, curious, and in some cases openly hostile. Zoe spotted Vivian Blackwood in the front row, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Taking a deep breath, Zoe stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We've called this meeting because we believe in transparency, in honesty, and in the power of truth to bring about real change." Over the next hour, Zoe, Olivia, and Asher took turns sharing their stories. They spoke of past mistakes and personal struggles, of lessons learned and perspectives changed. Zoe recounted the college protest that had led to her arrest, explaining how it had deepened her commitment to working within the system to effect change. Olivia opened up about her battle with addiction, her voice breaking as she described the moment she realized she needed help. "It was that experience that showed me the importance of support systems, of second chances," she said. "That's why the work we're doing now means so much to me." Asher's confession was perhaps the most shocking to the audience. He detailed some of Blackwood Industries' past ethical violations, taking full responsibility even for actions that had occurred before his time as CEO. "I can't change the past," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "but I can damn well change the future. And that's exactly what I intend to do." As they spoke, something remarkable began to happen. The hostility in the room began to fade, replaced by a palpable sense of empathy and understanding. People who had come ready to judge found themselves moved by the raw honesty on display. Even Vivian Blackwood's smug expression had given way to a look of confusion and perhaps a hint of grudging respect. When they opened the floor for questions, the first to stand was Maria, the young participant from Olivia's program. "I just want to say," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "that hearing your stories makes me believe even more in what you're trying to do. Everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do afterwards that matters." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. More people stood to speak, sharing their own stories of struggle and redemption, of hope for a better Crystalbrook. As the meeting drew to a close, there was a sense that something fundamental had shifted. The secrets that were meant to destroy them had instead humanized them, making their mission more relatable and their commitment more admirable. Outside the community center, Jackson Lee was already furiously typing on his laptop, crafting the article that would contextualize the night's revelations. But he knew that no matter how well he wrote it, the true story had already been told, not just by Zoe, Olivia, and Asher, but by the people of Crystalbrook themselves. As the crowd dispersed into the night, there was a buzz of excitement in the air. The transformation of Crystalbrook, it seemed, had entered a new phase. The old barriers of distrust and division were beginning to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of shared purpose and possibility. But even as hope blossomed, challenges remained. The old guard of Crystalbrook had been caught off guard, but they were far from defeated. And the real work of turning ambitious plans into concrete change was only just beginning. As Zoe, Olivia, and Asher left the community center, tired but exhilarated, they knew that the coming days and weeks would test their resolve like never before. But for the first time, they truly believed that they had the support of the people of Crystalbrook behind them. The city stood on the cusp of a new era. What that era would look like, only time would tell. 5 years had passed since the fateful town hall meeting that had changed the course of Crystalbrook's history. As the morning sun bathed the city in a warm glow, Zoe Harper stood at the window of her office in the Crystalbrook Community Learning Center, marveling at how much had changed and how much work still lay ahead. The learning center itself was a testament to the transformation that had swept through the city. What had started as a simple renovation project had blossomed into a state-of-the-art facility that served as both a school and a community hub. Children from all backgrounds mingled in its halls, benefiting from innovative educational programs and access to resources that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. As Zoe gathered her things for the day's meetings, her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Don't forget, interview with Crystal View at 2 p.m. Asher and I will meet you there." Zoe smiled, remembering how far they had all come. Olivia's non-profit had grown into one of the most respected organizations in the state, providing job training and support services to thousands of young people, and Asher had surprised them all. Under his leadership, Blackwood Industries had become a model of corporate responsibility, pioneering sustainable practices and ethical business models that were now being emulated across the country. The company's success had not only secured its future, but had also inspired other businesses in Crystalbrook to follow suit. As Zoe made her way through the bustling streets, she couldn't help but notice the changes all around her. The stark divide between the wealthy enclaves and struggling neighborhoods had begun to blur. New businesses, many of them started by graduates of Olivia's programs, dotted formerly abandoned storefronts. Parks and community spaces had sprung up where there had once been only neglect. But it wasn't just the physical landscape that had changed. There was a new spirit in Crystalbrook, a sense of shared purpose and possibility that transcended old barriers of class and status. People who had once viewed each other with suspicion now worked side by side on community projects and civic initiatives. Of course, the transformation hadn't been easy or without setbacks. There had been resistance from those who clung to the old ways, legal battles over new policies, and moments of doubt when it seemed like the weight of entrenched interests might be too much to overcome. Zoe thought back to one particularly dark moment about a year after the town hall meeting. A coalition of developers, backed by some of Crystalbrook's old guard, had tried to push through a massive luxury resort project that would have displaced hundreds of families from one of the city's historic neighborhoods. The ensuing battle had tested the limits of their newfound unity. For weeks, it seemed like the developers' deep pockets and political connections might win out. But then something remarkable happened. Led by Maria, the same young woman who had spoken up at the town hall, a group of students from Olivia's program had organized a grassroots campaign to save the neighborhood. They had gone door to door, rallied support on social media, and even developed an alternative proposal that would create jobs and housing without displacing residents. The turning point had come during a heated city council meeting. As arguments raged back and forth, Maria had stood up and delivered a speech that left the chamber in stunned silence. "This isn't about some abstract idea of progress," she had said, her voice ringing with passion. "This is about who we are as a community. Are we the kind of city that values profit over people? Or are we the kind of city that believes everyone deserves a chance to thrive?" In the end, the developer's proposal had been defeated, and Maria's alternative plan had been adopted. It was a victory that had cemented the new coalition's power and set the tone for Crystalbrook's future development. As Zoe arrived at the sleek offices of Crystal View, the city's most popular news outlet, she found Olivia and Asher waiting for her. The years had been kind to them all, adding a depth and confidence to their bearing that came from hard-won experience. "Ready for this?" Asher asked with a grin. "5 years ago, I never would have imagined we'd be here," Olivia laughed. "5 years ago, I never would have imagined a lot of things, but here we are." As they were ushered into the studio, Zoe felt a flutter of nerves. This interview would be broadcast live across the state, part of a series on cities that were successfully reinventing themselves for the 21st century. It was an opportunity to share Crystal Brook's story with a wider audience, to inspire other communities facing similar challenges. The interviewer, a respected journalist named Elena Rodriguez, greeted them warmly. "Thank you all for being here," she began as the cameras rolled. "Crystal Brook has become something of a model for urban transformation. Can you tell us how it all began?" As Zoe, Olivia, and Asher took turns recounting the journey of the past 5 years, Elena listened with rapt attention. They spoke of challenges overcome, partnerships forged, and lives changed. But most of all, they spoke of the people of Crystal Brook, the true heroes of the story. "It wasn't just about new policies or programs," Zoe explained. "It was about changing the way we saw ourselves as a community. Once people believed that real change was possible, there was no stopping them." As the interview drew to a close, Eleanor had one final question. "What's next for Crystal Brook? Where do you see the city 5 years from now?" The three friends exchanged glances, a world of shared experiences and unspoken understanding passing between them. "Crystal Brook's story is far from over," Olivia said finally. "We've made progress, but there's still so much work to be done. Income inequality, affordable housing, environmental sustainability. These are challenges we're still grappling with every day." Asher nodded in agreement. "But what's different now is that we're facing these challenges together. There's a sense of collective responsibility, a belief that we all have a stake in Crystal Brook's future." 5 years from now," Zoe added, her eyes shining with conviction, "I hope we'll be able to say that we've stayed true to that vision, that we've continued to grow and evolve, not just as a city but as a community. Because that's what Crystal Brook is now, not just a place, but an idea, an example of what's possible when people come together and dare to imagine a better future." As they left the studio, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, Zoe felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The path that had led her here, from that fateful wedding day to the present, had been filled with unexpected twists and turns. There had been moments of triumph and moments of despair, friendships forged and illusions shattered. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: the belief that change was possible, that a single act of courage could set in motion a transformation beyond imagination. As they walked down the street, Zoe caught sight of a familiar face. Vivian Blackwood, looking older but still elegant, was emerging from a nearby building. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no hostility in Vivian's gaze now, only a complex mix of emotions: respect, regret, and perhaps a hint of wonder at how thoroughly the world she had known had changed. Vivian nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of all that had passed between them. Zoe returned the nod, feeling not triumph, but a sense of closure. The battles of the past were over. The focus now was on the future, a future that belonged to all of Crystal Brook. As they continued on their way, Zoe, Olivia, and Asher fell into a comfortable silence. The afternoon stretched out before them, filled with meetings and decisions that would shape the next chapter of Crystal Brook's story. But for now, in this moment, they allowed themselves to simply be. Three friends who had dared to dream of a better world and had found the courage to make it a reality. The transformation of Crystal Brook was far from complete. There would be new challenges to face, new battles to fight. But as the sun shone down on the bustling streets and gleaming buildings, on the parks filled with laughter and the classrooms buzzing with potential, one thing was clear: the spirit of change that had taken root in this once divided city would not be easily extinguished. Crystal Brook had become more than just a success story. It had become a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of compassion, courage, and collective action. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, to reach across divides, and work together for the common good, that beacon would continue to shine, lighting the way for generations to come. As Zoe looked out at the city she loved, at the future stretching out before them, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they might face, she knew one thing for certain: the transformation of Crystal Brook had only just begun.